On this week's show, each year as we approach 9/11, we remember that 3,000 lives were lost on that terrible Tuesday in 2001. Since then, what liberties have we lost to government overreach, corruption, and abuse? But first, despite President Trump's bluster, is the USA losing its leadership position in the world order? Have we already lost it? I'm Holland Cook in Washington. This is The Big Picture on RT America. Implementing the Paris Climate Agreement, low carbon, sustainable development, 5G technology shared with all partners, all righteous goals that the world seeks from a leading superpower, and all elements of a comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Russia. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, our president has pulled us out of the JCPOA nuke treaty, imposed sanctions on Iran and tariffs on China, and he abides the regime change meddling in Venezuela and elsewhere. Is this erratic administration, plus emerging Eurasian collaboration, the perfect storm that can sink the U.S. dollar as the world's preeminent currency and our leadership among nations? Let's ask RT defense expert, longtime Pentagon official Michael Maloof, and Peter Schiff, chief economist and global strategist at Euro-Pacific Capital. Welcome both. And Michael, during the recent G7 meeting, I couldn't resist the temptation. I muted my TV, and to me, the body language was very telling. Is it my imagination, or are other world leaders merely tolerating Trump's buffoonery?
Well, they're trying to be polite to answer your question, but on the other hand, they are looking in other directions. They see that the United States is going it alone with its America First approach, which is basically controlled by the neoconservatives in this government, and as a result of using economic warfare through sanctions and tariff battles with almost every country in the world these days, they're looking for alternatives, and we're beginning to see Europe, our Western partners there, beginning to look more eastward as a consequence. And I think as a result of all of this, and with a benchmark of the Trump administration, as you point out, dropping out of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement in May last year, that really set the tone for an acceleration of getting out from under the dominance of the U.S. dollar and the Western financial system, such as SWIFT and what have you, and looking for alternative approaches. And what we're seeing here is this acceleration. We're seeing Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, India, Pakistan, the BRICS countries of Brazil, China, Russia, and even South Africa beginning now to look more eastward in this pursuit, and it's not stopping. It's accelerating, and as a result of sanctions that are being put on our European friends, they're looking more eastward as a consequence. So this is beginning to evolve, but it's accelerating more rapidly now.
Well, Peter, when I hit the mute button during the G7, admittedly what I am observing is subjective, but numbers are objective. Measurably, how is the USA's stature faring under this mercurial president?
Well, first of all, the problems that the United States have, are way before Donald Trump. I mean, the real issue for the dollar and what's going to sink the dollar is our own fiscal profligacy. And these large deficits, budget deficits and trade deficits, were here long before we elected Donald Trump. Now, he has not done anything about it. In fact, the deficits are getting bigger, both trade and budget deficits. What has enabled this over the years has been the world's willingness to hold U.S. dollars as the primary reserve currency and to continue to loan money to Americans and to the U.S. government so we can continue to live beyond our means. We can have enormous government programs that we don't pay for, and we can consume all sorts of goods that we don't manufacture. And we can live in an economy based on consumption and debt without having to save or produce. The world has done that for us. And I think this is what's going to come to an end. I think we're going to see a collapse in the value of the dollar And when the dollar does collapse, America's power is going to dissipate. And Americans are going to have to deal with reality that we've hollowed out our infrastructure. We've been living above our means, and there's going to be a day of reckoning for these years of excesses. Unfortunately, Trump didn't start this, but he may be the fall guy. Who knows?
And it is compound interest that's eating it away. You said when, not if the dollar collapses, Peter. You think it's inevitable?
Of course it's inevitable, because we're not going to stop with the fiscal profligacy until it collapses. As long as the world is willing to keep lending Americans money, we'll keep spending it, particularly the government. So the only thing that's going to cause a change is going to be a crisis. And it's going to be a dollar crisis. It's going to be a sovereign debt crisis. It should have already happened. But we've been able to kick the can down the road for many, many years. But the problem with all the can kicking is the underlying problems have gotten so much worse. So now it's a much bigger problem that we're going to have to deal with.
Michael, have the Iran sanctions backfired?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually caused the people to be more emboldened to support their government and actually despise the United States. But for the government itself, it is looking more eastward. It has actually entered into some in recent days, in fact, some very serious oil and gas negotiations and agreements with China that absolutely undercut the sanctions that Trump is trying to impose, and they're going to be dealing not in dollars, they're going to be dealing in renminbis and tomans, reals, whatever the currencies are, and they're looking for alternative baskets of currencies to work with. And in exchange, they don't have to change their government, they don't have to change their culture or anything like that we've insisted upon by joining the Western system of you must adhere to democracy first. That doesn't exist in this alternative approach, and it's, as I said, accelerating as a consequence, and in very recent days.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, in fact, the Chinese just entered into a long-term deal with Iran regarding building up their infrastructure in exchange for Iranian oil.
Yeah.
And the sanctions that we have been imposing around the world, this is simply giving the world yet another reason to look for an alternative to the U.S. dollar, which they should have been looking for a long time ago. But now, by flexing muscle that, we really shouldn't be flexing, we're in effect biting the hands that have been feeding us. And now they're questioning whether or not they should continue to do that. And so we have accelerated the process of the dollar's demise by antagonizing so many of the nations around the world that we really need to continue to hold the dollar. We keep talking about how, or Trump keeps talking about how, we've got the Chinese over a barrel, and they're somehow in a weaker bargaining position than we are, but we have far more to lose. Because the Chinese simply lose a customer that doesn't pay,
right,
and that they have to vendor finance. But we lose a banker, we lose a supplier. The Chinese have been propping up the U.S. economy. We have been screwing up the Chinese economy because in order to maintain this relationship, they have pursued reckless monetary policy. They have inflated bubbles. They have done things in order to artificially prop up the dollar so they can continue to sell products to people that really can't afford to buy them.
Right.
China should be developing trading relationships with countries that can produce the things that the Chinese citizens want so that trade is balanced. They can't run this enormous trade deficit with the United States or surplus with the United States. It is screwing up their economy.
Well, just this week, reporters asked the president if he was concerned that China holds so much U.S. debt. Here's his reply.
No, I'm not worried about it at all. They have approximately $1 trillion. That's a trickle compared to what we do, and plus interest rates are very low. We'll have no trouble. There's nothing anybody's going to be doing. We're in a very strong position, really strong position, probably in terms of refinancing the strongest position we've ever been in, okay?
Well, to put it politely, businessman Trump was no stranger to refi. But Peter, $1 trillion is 12 zeros. Is President Trump calling it a trickle a little too nonchalant about how deeply in debt we are and to whom?
Yeah, he's pretty much delusional. And of course, when he talks about $1 trillion, that's just the Treasury debt. The Chinese hold a lot of U.S. dollar-denominated debt in addition to the Treasury debt. So it's a lot more than $1 trillion. And on the margin, that is a tremendous amount of money. If we lose Chinese lending, if the Chinese want to unload their dollar-denominated debt, President Trump seems to think there's an ample supply of lenders that really want that debt. I don't believe that they exist. I don't know that there's that many foolish people out there in the world that want to lend so much money to the U.S. at such a low rate of interest.
Right.
And once the thing turns around, what Trump forgets is that the national debt is not financed with 30-year treasuries. The majority of it is financed with short-term treasury bills that constantly mature. We have to roll over this debt all the time. And if foreigners finally lose confidence in our ability to repay our debts with money that actually has any value, the game is over. I mean, why do you think gold prices have moved above 1,500? People are losing confidence in the dollar. And you can't see it in the foreign exchange markets. The dollar hasn't really started to fall against other fiat currencies, but that's because all fiat currencies are falling against the dollar, against gold. But the strength of gold is showing an underlying weakness in the dollar that the Forex markets aren't showing yet, but they will.
Gotcha. Now, Michael, about China, the ancient Silk Road trade route linked to Asia with Europe, its modern-day renaissance, the Belt and Road Initiative will create what the Council of Foreign Relations calls a vast network of railways, energy pipeline, highways, and streamlined border crossings westward through the mountains, former Soviet republics, and southward to Pakistan and India and the rest of Southeast Asia. And that in addition to physical infrastructure, China plans to build 50 special economic zones, and that to accommodate expanding maritime traffic, China would invest in port development along the Indian Ocean from Southeast Asia all the way to East Africa. Michael, I don't hear anything about American greenbacks there, but dollars aside, how does this huge undertaking impact the USA's world stature?
Well, it's causing these other countries to basically isolate the United States. And as I said earlier, a lot of our European allies are doing the same. Germany, which is in a deep approaching a recession, it has to sell. I mean, these are all exporting countries. They need markets, and they're looking to China. And you mentioned the Silk Road. There's also the Eurasia Union that is also under Russia domain. And so you have Russia, China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries, which have become much more powerful as a consequence. Used to be an economic entity. Now it's becoming more of a military and political entity. And you have India, China, Pakistan, all of these countries coming together under this this package of elements that are coalescing almost at the same time, such as the Belt and Road Initiative by China, which is also going to be going in different directions, including Iran, through Russia, and through some of the former Soviet countries, which form of Central Asia.
Well, President Xi's predecessor, Deng Xiaoping, had a mantra, hide your strength and bide your time. Peter, I'm almost out of time, so I need the short answer. But for all the short-term conniptions Trump's China tariffs are causing the stock market, I get the impression that time is on China's side, that culturally they have a longer-term pain point than American presidents who change every 4 years. How do you see this tariff war playing out quickly?
Well, I don't see it playing out very well, but I think the stock market has a lot more to worry about than the trade war. I think there are other problems that are much more important that are being ignored. This is a big, fat, ugly bubble. Donald Trump was right as a candidate, and the air is going to come out of this bubble regardless of what happens with the trade war.
So we're not surprised that gold is doing so well. Thank you, Peter Schiff and Michael Maloof.
Pleasure.
Coming up, when terrorists struck 18 years ago, clocks stopped. And did 9/11 unleash an enemy within? This is the big picture on RT America.